1. Introduction. RAWSEP view: the United States government was on track in the Biden administration to reduce the prices for both clean energy heat pumps and clean energy electric cars. Trump tariffs are expected to upset those plans to prevent future air pollution and prevent climate change. The United States government should, instead of certifying wood stoves as safe when they are not safe, go forward with regulations that ban wood stove use and direct government money for use of forest refuse only. For home building and furniture building, for just a few examples of use of forest products for non-burning uses, it is well known from scientific and medical research that wood burning is a substantial source of PM2.5 emissions, yet the wood burning industry uses the scientifically debunked theory named carbon neutrality of wood burning to argue that wood burning replacing coal burning in industry and in a trickle-down argument that wood burning should continue for home heating should continue. Presumably because it is called renewable, wood may be renewable in the sense that a tree can be planted in the place of a cut-down burned tree, but it takes centuries or decades for the newly planted tree to attain the stature of the cut-down burned tree. During those centuries or decades, photosynthesis, which converts CO2 to oxygen and so sequesters some carbon, will not take place at the same rate as photosynthesis was performed previously, and wood burning emits both CO2 and PM2.5, and PM2.5 is not absorbed by trees, so PM2.5 is not diminished by planting a tree in the place of a cut-down and burned tree. In fact, a living tree closes its pores against the presence of PM2.5 from nearby wood burning, just as humans hold their breath in the presence of PM2.5 from nearby wood burning. And when a tree closes its pores, the level of photosynthesis that absorbs CO2 pollution goes down. Wood burning emits 90% PM2.5 particulate matter of 2.5 micrometer size, the perfect size to infiltrate the human lungs, setting off a cascade of human health problems and early deaths. Contrary to many beliefs, wood burning emits 2.8 times the PM2.5 as the fossil fuel coal burning, and wood burning emits 450 times the PM2.5 as the fossil fuel natural gas burning. Replacing coal burning with wood burning creates more air pollution in the form of CO2 and PM2.5 than coal burning. This emission data comes from testing the cleanest burning wood stove in the United Kingdom, the Eco-Design Wood Stove and International Convention does not count the emissions from wood burning. The emissions from wood burning are erased from all countries around the world when calculating if each country has met its climate goals. This non-counting or erasure of wood burning emissions data from climate goals does not mean wood burning emissions do not exist. RAWSEP view: purple air PM2.5 monitors hanging from the eaves of the house of a near neighbor should be used to measure the level of PM2.5 in the air hyperlocally in the yards of near neighbors of indoor residential wood burners. If PM2.5 levels exceed World Health Organization standards of 5 micrograms per cubic meter annually, then that evidence of air pollution from wood burning should lead to the shutdown of that indoor residential wood burning appliance, one appliance at a time if necessary.
Hi, my name is Lily. Andrew gave you the intro to Residents Against Wood Smoke Emission Particulates and their concern for air pollution from indoor residential wood burning. Residents Against Wood Smoke Emission Particulates, or RAWSEP, would like every near neighbor of an indoor residential wood burner whose wood smoke enters their yards and sickens the near neighbors to have a purple air PM2.5 monitor hanging from the eaves of their home to measure the level of PM2.5 entering their yards. That measurement of air pollution should be used as evidence of unnecessary air pollution, and each indoor residential wood burner should be shut down based on that evidence, one indoor residential wood burner at a time if necessary. The presentation by Andrew ended at 2 minutes 5 seconds. The same presentation by Emma starts at 2 minutes 3 seconds before the end of this podcast. So I am Lily, your timekeeper, and you can start the next podcast at 2 minutes 5 seconds in if you would not like to see the presentation by Andrew a second time. This presentation by me, Lily, ends at 5 minutes in. What you will see in the main content of this RAWSEP podcast will be news about air pollution from indoor residential wood burning and how that air pollution is being combated by ordinary people just like you who are unfortunately near neighbors of indoor residential wood burners at this time. There will also be news about unnecessary and highly polluting use of wood as fuel in industrial wood burners and preventable air pollution from wood burning wildfires. There will also be news about air pollution from PM2.5 from gas-powered cars. There will also be news about airborne diseases which are also preventable with vaccines such as COVID-19 and measles and whooping cough, to name just a few. In 2025, Residents Against Wood Smoke Emission Particulates is also concerned with combating the Trump destruction of government funding for programs which protect human health through the Department of Health and Human Services, and Trump destruction of programs which fund the science and medical research plan to protect human health from preventable illnesses. Protecting human health is a patriotic act, and our defense against enemies is weakened if we are not as healthy as we can be. Heat pump rebates are now offered by the federal government, distributed through the eligible United States, are available in 2025, and are the best, cleanest, and now cheapest alternative to indoor residential wood burning if that burning is actually done to purportedly save money. Wind and solar as sources of the electricity that powers heat pumps and electric cars is also cheaper than burning wood. The adverse health effects that are caused by indoor residential wood burning also come at a cost to near neighbors, both in shortening and ending their lives, and in actual hospital, clinic, and funeral costs. Instead of being compensated monetarily, near neighbors should instead be able to achieve immediate relief by stopping indoor residential wood burning in their hyper-localized neighborhoods, which relief readings from purple air PM2.5 monitors used as evidence of air pollution will help them achieve. Welcome to news about hopeful scientific and medical achievements that will also help us achieve the goal of clean air to breathe.
Episode 57DHXXS, September 26, 2025 Celebrity Fire Ceremony, Needlessly Pollutes Air with PM 2.5. In episode 57DHXXS, one with the popularity of Trump dropping the Trump disastrous performance at the United Nations, the return of comedian Jimmy Kimmel to the airwaves, and the Tuesday election in Arizona of Democratic Representative Adelita Grijalva, who will provide a vote to release the Epstein files the Trump administration appears to be making a dramatic push to seize complete control of. The government too at the United Nations in New York on September 24, 2025 to begin UN debate. UN Leader Guterres cited the example of his own resistance in his youth to a dictator in Portugal. Trump spoke against the United Nations, and Trump spoke against Air Pollution Mitigation. A RAWSEP. Do you know Fireside chat this year, unlike in 2024, when he was interviewed sitting in an armchair in front of a burning fire, which may have been a wood burning fire in 2025. Al Gore sends an audio presentation to the New York Times Climate Forward Convention on September 24th. 2024, most presentations, both audio and video, are now available on YouTube if you search under the New York Times Climate Forward 2025 Air Pollution from Wood Burning, Air Pollution and Climate Change, Al Gore on Trump and the future of climate action for air pollution, from Wood Burning, I worry about the future of my daughter, the silent majority, who care about the climate crisis, 4C2 Celebrity Fire Ceremony, needlessly pollutes the air with PM 2.55 air pollution. From wood burning, green energy is booming, but fossil fuels need to shrink too, and RAWSEP Interjects Wood burning needs to shrink and disappear too. 6 Air pollution from wood burning, Trump Energy Secretary to return billions set aside for green projects. 7 Hawaii air pollution from wood burning, Maui officials knocked on doors to warn residents before wildfire threat. Receded Hawaii fires. 8 RFK Junior Vaccine denial, Trump faces Republican backlash over the RFK Junior autism and vaccine, claims 9 women America and Germany from Nazi Germany to the America of Trump, why strongmen rely on women at home. 10A United Kingdom Trump far-right friend resisting UK right-wing Nigel Farage-ism offers the Lib Dems a rare clarity of purpose. 10B Europe the far-right Trump. If Europe keeps placating its own far-right, how can it possibly stand up to Trump? 11 Turkey political prisoner Mayor of Istanbul. I was elected Mayor of Istanbul, but I write this from jail. Turkish democracy is under grave threat. Ekrem Imamoğlu Main Content. One with the popularity of Trump dropping the Trump disastrous performance at the United Nations, the return of comedian Jimmy Kimmel to the airwaves, and the Tuesday election in Arizona of Democratic Representative Adelita Grijalva, who will provide a vote to release the Epstein files, the Trump administration appears to be making a dramatic push to seize complete control of the government. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP. For brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates of 501c3 nonprofit organization. September 25th, 2025 Heather Cox Richardson. September 26th, 2025 1A last night Office of Management and Budget Director Russell Vaught, one of the authors of Project 2025, the far-right document guiding most actions of Trump in 2025, tried to jam the Democrats into passing the continuing resolution to fund the government. From Republicans, officials leaked a memo to saying that if the Democrats refuse to pass the Republican measure, the administration will try to fire rather than furlough large numbers of federal employees. Such a move would be challenged in the courts, and the government has been forced to rehire many of the people it forced out earlier this year after those firings left agencies badly understaffed. But the threat is not idle. Vaught is a Christian nationalist who has called for a radical constitutionalism that demolishes the modern American state and replaces it with a powerful executive House minority. Leader Hakeem Jeffries D. New York responded, listen Russ, you are a malignant political hack. We will not be intimidated by your threat to engage in mass firings. Get lost. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer D. New York said in a statement, Trump has been firing federal workers since day one, not to govern, but to scare. This is nothing new and has nothing to do with funding the government. These unnecessary firings will either be overturned in court or the administration will end up hiring the workers back, just like they did as recently as today. Trump appears focused on September 30th, when the government funding crisis will hit, and the days after it. Although courts have ruled that he does not have the power to impose tariffs willy-nilly today, Trump announced new tariffs of 100% on pharmaceuticals, 50% on kitchen and bathroom cabinets, 30% on upholstered furniture, and 25% on heavy big trucks beginning on October 1st. On social media, he claimed such tariffs were necessary for national security and other reasons. 1B James Comey days after Trump demanded that the Department of Justice move now to prosecute those he perceives to be his enemies. A federal grand jury has indicted former FBI Director James Comey for allegedly lying to Congress and obstructing an investigation. Comey was an early casualty of the Trump first administration, fired after he refused to kill the FBI investigation of the ties between the Trump 2016 campaign and Russian operatives. 1C Trump replacement of U.S. Attorney. Over last weekend, Trump exploded at then acting U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia, Eric Siebert, a career prosecutor, after Siebert concluded there was not enough evidence of a crime to charge Comey for allegedly lying to Congress or New York Attorney General Letitia James for alleged mortgage fraud. On Monday, Trump replaced Siebert with White House aide and the Trump former personal lawyer Lindsey Halligan, and yesterday 3 sources told Ken Dilanian and Carol Leonig of MSNBC that they expected Halligan to try to get a grand jury to indict Comey before the 5-year statute of limitations on lying to Congress runs out next Tuesday. On Thursday, the DOJ delivered an indictment against Comey. My family and I have known for years that there are costs to standing up to Trump, Comey said tonight in a video, but we will not live on our knees, and you should not either. Somebody that I love dearly recently said that fear is the tool of a tyrant, and she is right, but I am not afraid, and I hope you are not either. I hope instead you are engaged, you are paying attention, and you will vote like your beloved country depends upon it, which it does. My heart is broken for the Department of Justice, but I have great confidence in the federal judicial system. I am innocent, so let us have a trial and keep the faith. 1D The Trump Department of Justice sued 6 states in order to obtain voter information in addition to 2 states sued in the recent past. The Trump DOJ was busy today. It also sued 6 states, California, Michigan, Minnesota, New York, New Hampshire, and Pennsylvania, to force them to hand over their voter rolls and information identifying those voters. Matt Cohen of Democracy Docket notes that state officials from both Democratic and Republican governments have questioned why the government wants that information. This lawsuit comes after a nearly identical lawsuit the DOJ filed last week against Maine and Oregon. Democratic Secretary of State Tobias Red of Oregon called the lawsuits an attempt by Trump to use the DOJ to go after his political opponents and undermine our elections. Too, at the United Nations in New York on September 24, 2025, to begin UN debate. UN Leader Guterres cited the example of his own resistance in his youth to a dictator in Portugal. 2b. Trump spoke against the United Nations, and Trump spoke against air pollution mitigation. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates of 501c3 nonprofit organization. September 24, 2025. Heather Cox Richardson. 2a. In New York City, this morning the United Nations opened its General Assembly marking the 80th anniversary of the establishment of the United Nations itself. Secretary General of the United Nations Antonio Guterres warned that we have entered an age of reckless disruption when the principles of the United Nations are under siege. Will we choose a world of raw power or a world of laws? A world that is a scramble for self-interest or a world where nations come together? A world where might makes right or a world of rights for all? Guterres urged member states to choose peace rooted in international law, human dignity, and human rights, climate justice, to put technology at the service of humanity, and to strengthen the United Nations for the 21st century. Guterres recalled that his youth in Portugal was spent in the darkness of dictatorship, where fear silenced voices and hope was nearly crushed. Yet even in the bleakest hours, especially then, I discovered a truth that has never left me. Power does not reside in the hands of those who dominate or divide. Real power resides from people, from our shared resolve to uphold dignity, to defend equality, to believe fiercely in our common humanity and the potential of every human being. I learned early to persevere, to speak out, to refuse to surrender, no matter the challenge, no matter the obstacle, no matter the hour. We must, and we will overcome. 2b. Trump also addressed the gathered world leaders, guests of the United States. Trump began by complaining that the teleprompter was not working, and also mentioned that an escalator on which he and First Lady Melania Trump had been riding had stopped shortly after they stepped onto it. The Trump speech went on to depict a fantasy world in which he had single-handedly saved the world. He claimed that his administration has negotiated one historic trade deal after another, and that in a period of just 7 months I have ended 7 wars. He claimed that London has a terrible mayor. The mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, is Muslim and is of Pakistani descent, that it is so changed, and that they want Sharia law. Then Trump turned to another of his priorities. Fossil fuels. Energy is another area where the United States is now thriving like never before. He said, we are getting rid of the falsely named renewables. After another long harangue about renewable energy, he said, if you do not get away from this green scam, your country is going to fail. The speech struck at the heart of the very concept of the United Nations. In its wake, a foreign affairs journalist captured the larger story of the Trump speech. Do Americans see how embarrassing this is? Trump loyalists turned tonight to the idea that someone had sabotaged Trump by stopping the escalator and the teleprompter. A UN official said the UN understands that someone from the Trump party who ran ahead of him inadvertently triggered the stop mechanism on the escalator. The official said the White House was operating the teleprompter for Trump. Headlines: The New York Times, September 25, 2025. Business coffee shop Starbucks to cut jobs, close stores, and take $1 billion hit in revamp effort. The New York Times government shutdown and Trump plans. Trump administration eyes more mass layoffs if government shuts down. The New York Times. Oklahoma. Ryan Walters, Oklahoma education chief who promoted Bibles in schools, to resign. The New York Times TV star Democrat. The Jimmy Kimmel return draws 6.2 million viewers. Ratings show the New York Times TV star Democrat Kimmel says there is plenty of room in the bad ratings club. The New York Times TV. Trump budget cuts to fund tax breaks for the rich. In PBS may shut down next year amid funding cuts. The New York Times. Trump budget cuts to fund tax breaks for the rich. Social Security workers struggle to meet demand after Doge cuts. The New York Times. Trump economy opinion. Trump Vance the economy. 11 voters discuss. The New York Times. Trump employee leaves Taylor Buttigieg, longtime Trump aide and deputy chief of staff, to depart the White House. The New York Times. Trump enemies. Trump U.S. attorney races to present case against James Comey. The New York Times. Trump and Epstein fallout. A statue of Trump and Epstein holding hands is removed from the National Mall. The New York Times. Trump math scores. What declines in reading and math mean for the U.S. workforce? The New York Times. Trump phoniness for Trump job and crime data is phony unless it supports his views. The New York Times. Trump versus universities opinion. The grand strategy behind the Trump crackdown on academia. The New York Times. Venezuela. Trump war. The U.S. keeps killing Venezuelans on boats. Is that legal? The New York Times. France and Libya corruption. Sarkozy found guilty of conspiracy to seek Libyan money and sentenced to prison. The New York Times. Ukraine. Trump signals with his pivot on Ukraine. Trump may be washing his hands of the war. The New York Times. Turkey. Trump live updates Trump to meet with the leader of Turkey at the White House. The New York Times. China. There are more robots working in China than the rest of the world combined. The New York Times. Headlines. The New York Times. September 24, 2025. 3. A RAWSEP view. No fireside chat this year, unlike in 2024 when he was interviewed sitting in an armchair in front of a burning fire, which may have been a wood-burning fire. In 2025, Al Gore sends an audio presentation to the New York Times Climate Forward Convention on September 24, 2024. Most presentations, both audio and video, are now available on YouTube. If you search under the New York Times Climate Forward 2025 Air Pollution from Wood-Burning Air Pollution and Climate Change, Al Gore on Trump and the Future of Climate Action. The New York Times. Air Pollution from Wood-Burning Trump UN visit at UN. Trump says green energy is a scam and attacks climate science. The New York Times. Air Pollution From wood-burning climate forward live updates how Trump is changing climate policy globally. The New York Times, 3B air pollution from wood-burning despite Trump. The world is not slowing on climate. EU official says. The New York Times, 3C1 RAWSEP view. A former TV star now promotes his attendance at a fire ceremony with King Charles. However, in the opinion of the editor of RAWSEP, this needless and unnecessary air pollution from wood-burning should not be promoted. Air pollution from wood-burning. Opinion. Rainn Wilson. What I learned at a fire ceremony with King Charles. The New York Times, 3C2 air pollution from wood-burning. RAWSEP view. Celebrity fire ceremony needlessly pollutes the air with PM 2.5. Opinion. A sitcom star and the King of England walk into a fire ceremony. The New York Times. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates. A 501c3 nonprofit organization. The New York Times, September 24, 2025. The sitcom actor is a producer and an environmental activist in Los Angeles. The sitcom star writes. RAWSEP interjects that hopefully the irony of what the sitcom star witnesses will not just be a source of ironic hilarity, but a transformative learning experience on what not to do after reflection, with the slow dawning realization that producing unnecessary air pollution from wood burning is the actual opposite of spiritual, since it harms the health of both the participants in wood burning and their human neighbors near and far, and contributes to climate change in the very nature with a capital, in that the wood burners very ironically claim to revere. Back to the article. As the shaman guided us to turn to the east, our hands outstretched to the sky in supplication, I looked around and took in a series of absurd facts. The 50 of us invited to Highgrove Gardens in Britain to explore new directions in climate action were dressed in prim suits and summer dresses, while the handful of indigenous elders among us from Mexico, Hawaii, the Amazon, and South Africa were decked out in elaborate feathers, beads, and hand-tooled leather. That the air was full of smoke from a bonfire, a smell that reminded me that half of my house had burned down in the Los Angeles area wildfires only 8 months before, and that about 20 feet away his royal arms in the air was Charles, the King of Britain. This gathering in July was sponsored in part by an environmental group I work with called Grounded, and it was one of many I have attended in my newfound role as a part-time climate activist. Many scientists who have studied the neurological changes that happen when we have regular contact with the outdoors. RAWSEP interjects that when it is harmful to stay outdoors because of the danger of inhaling PM 2.5 particulates from wood burning, then regular contact with the outdoors is prevented. Among people who care about their own human health. To return to the article excerpt. At a Baha'i religious youth camp in Seabeck, Washington, we sang for hours around a campfire, and I first discovered blissful interconnectedness with nature. RAWSEP interjects that here was where the sitcom star ironically discovered his interconnectedness with air pollution from wood burning. It is too bad that a formative experience was with preventable air pollution, like someone who smoked cigarettes from an early age and now needs to quit. This sitcom star must, for his own health and the health of others, refrain from repeating harmful activities from the past, although this will be difficult and require self-control and will require breaking an apparent addiction. To return to the article excerpt. Back in Britain after the fire ceremony, our sundry group circled in to learn from the wise men and women who had come from Latin America, Hawaii, and Africa. Civilization, they told us, has for the last several hundred years had a relationship of extraction instead of regeneration with our sacred Mother Earth. RAWSEP interjects that it is not wise to label creating air pollution from wood burning as regeneration. Applying that word to air pollution caused by wood burning is scientifically inaccurate, logically inaccurate, and to play to this crowd, spiritually inaccurate. It is not wise to produce air pollution from wood burning unless there is no alternative to warming your home. In 2025, there are clean alternatives for home heating and for industrial power, and unless these clean alternatives are used, people are deluding themselves that they are at one with nature. They are harming nature, and most importantly for RAWSEP, harming the health and shortening the lives of human beings. To return to the article excerpt, in which the sitcom star seems to have learned nothing from the experience since that unforgettable afternoon. The sitcom star states that he hopes the fires in the future are the kind that involve indigenous elders and perhaps the King of Britain. Air pollution from wood burning. China. Opinion. The China pivot from green tech could be bad news for the climate. The New York Times. Air pollution from wood burning. Climate change. Air pollution. The world comes to New York for a very different climate week. The New York Times. Artificial intelligence. OpenAI to join tech giants in building 5 new data centers in U.S. The New York Times. Aviation. NASA launches IMAP and space weather missions on SpaceX rocket. How to watch. The New York Times. Consumers food recipes. Cherry Carpaca recipe. Consumers food recipes. Snickerdoodle muffins recipe. Consumers reading. Crime. John J. Lennon is a true criminal still in prison, and this is his non-fiction book on criminals. Book review. The Tragedy of True Crime by John J. Lennon. The New York Times. Democrats investigate law firms over free work for Commerce Department. The New York Times. Government shutdown. Trump plans a federal shutdown may be imminent. How would it affect the economy? The New York Times. Government shutdown. Trump plans. Trump government shutdown. Shutdown crisis test. The Trump go it alone approach to Democrats. The New York Times. Injury prevention. Sports. Women. The Rugby World Cup for women. How flashing mouthguards are helping detect potential head injuries. The Athletic. Massachusetts. Molten Reddy's primary challenge against Markey in Massachusetts. The New York Times. Medicine and science. Are the longevity rules different for women? The New York Times. Medicine and science. Do vaccines cause autism? And other questions answered. The New York Times. Medicine and science. Harvard dean was paid $150,000 as an expert witness in Tylenol lawsuits. The New York Times. Medicine and science. How did Maria Brañas Moreira, who was the oldest person in the world, live so long? The New York Times. Medicine and science. How to avoid a root canal. The New York Times. Medicine and science. Opinion. Autism has never been one thing. The New York Times. Medicine and science. Philanthropy. Strike a promising deal to turn back HIV. The New York Times. Medicine and science on COVID and autism. Trump strays from the science. The New York Times. Medicine and science. Screwworm case detected less than 70 miles from U.S. Mexico. Order. The New York Times. Medicine and science. To treat prostate cancer, there are more options than ever. The New York Times. Medicine and science. The Trump surreal Tylenol guidance worries pregnant women. The New York Times. Medicine and science. Why take Tylenol during pregnancy? The risks of fevers. The New York Times. Music. Andrew Lloyd Webber reimagines Phantom of the Opera with Masquerade. The New York Times. Music. Carol Kay is being honored by the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. She does not care. The New York Times New York City mayoral race, 10 more questions with Zoran Mamdani. The New York Times New York City mayoral race, the Mamdani plan for government-run grocery stores, will it help? The New York Times Nature, a tiny seabird faces growing threats in the forest. The New York Times Oklahoma storm rips part of roof off. Oklahoma hospital forcing evacuations. The New York Times Science, the mega raptor had giant claws and an appetite for crocodilians. The New York Times TV star Democrat, after days of silence. Joe Rogan weighs in on the Kimmel suspension. The New York Times TV star Democrat to catch a predator ended almost 20 years ago. Its grim legacy lives on. The New York Times TV star Democrat. Disney raises prices for streaming plans in the U.S. The New York Times TV star Democrat. Here is how late night became political before Trump. The New York Times TV star Democrat Jimmy Kimmel somber but defiant defends free speech in return to ABC. The New York Times TV star Democrat. The Jimmy Kimmel tearful return to late night. The New York Times TV star Democrat Kimmel returns to air as Trump threatens legal action. The New York Times TV star Democrat. Like his suspension, the Kimmel return draws a divided reaction. The New York Times TV star Democrat opinion. Jimmy Kimmel is still funny. The New York Times TV star Democrat opinion. Now the left cares about free speech again. The New York Times TV star Democrat opinion. Trump is building the blue scare. The New York Times TV star Democrat. U.S. threatens to bar foreigners over remarks about Charlie Kirk. The New York Times TV star Democrat Brendan Carr of the FCC plans to keep going after the media. Following the Jimmy Kimmel return, the New York Times Tennessee Memphis woman who tried to fraudulently sell Graceland gets more than 4 years in prison. The New York Times Texas Camp Mystic to reopen after Texas floods over objections from parents of victims. The New York Times Trump crypto United Arab Emirates. The UAE got AI chips. The Trump inner circle got crypto riches. The New York Times Trump crypto. The Trump aides and their involvement in chips and crypto deals draw Senate calls for inquiries. The New York Times Trump economy. 5 pearls of financial wisdom from Jonathan Clements. The New York Times Trump Justice Department. Despite the Trump pressure on Justice Department, certain safeguards are beyond his reach. The New York Times Trump military. The Pentagon. The press and the fight to control national security coverage. The New York Times Trump UN visit escalator at UN stops when Trump steps on setting off conspiracy theories. The New York Times Trump UN visit General Assembly updates after meeting with Zelensky at UN. Trump shifts stance on Russia. The New York Times Trump UN visit in a sudden shift. Trump says Ukraine can win the war with Russia. The New York Times Trump UN visit. Trump claims again at the UN that he ended 7 wars. Here is a closer look. The New York Times Union's Republican who has criticized the police wins major endorsement of union. The New York Times United Nations UN health goals weakened by industry pressure. Experts say. The New York Times Utah Moab Music Festival a glorious place for performance. The New York Times Canada a long walk on Prince Edward Island. The New York Times Puerto Rico Trump actions opinion. Trump is pulling the plug on the economy of Puerto Rico. The New York Times Mexico Cortez hundreds of years ago this conquistador changed history. Neglect haunts his tomb in Mexico. The New York Times Venezuela Trump war opinion. America is blowing up boats and asking questions later. The New York Times United Kingdom London Mayor the Sadiq Khan office rejects the Trump comments about London, calling them bigoted. The New York Times United Kingdom aviation some flights are delayed at London Stansted Airport after small fire. The New York Times United Kingdom UK endures a Trump scolding at UN days after lavish state visit. The New York Times Germany brain drain from the US. Germany woos Indian workers spooked by the Trump H-1B visa fee. The New York Times Ukraine opinion. If only we would fight as hard to save our democracy as Ukrainians are to save theirs. The New York Times Slovenia on a road trip through Slovenia exploring food, wine, and nature. The New York Times Malawi president concedes election to his predecessor. The New York Times China 1 million evacuated in China as typhoon Ragasa barrels toward coast. The New York Times China a curator flees Bangkok after China deems his art show too provocative. The New York Times China tests Johnston diplomat who helped preserve old Shanghai dies at 93. The New York Times Ukraine the Trump big flip on Ukraine and a defiant Jimmy Kimmel. The New York Times Ukraine the Trump U-turn on Ukraine was a surprise. Zelensky says. The New York Times Ukraine Zelensky issues call to arms saying global institutions have failed. The New York Times Ukraine Zelensky urges powerful pressure on Russia at UN General Assembly. The New York Times Ukraine the Ukrainians are grateful but skeptical after the Trump turnabout on the war. The New York Times headlines. The Guardian September 24th 2025 for air pollution from wood burning. I worry about the future of my daughter. The silent majority who care about the climate crisis. The Guardian 5 air pollution from wood burning. The Guardian view on the climate crisis. Green energy is booming. What fossil fuels need to shrink to. Editorial. The Guardian and RAWSEP Interjects Wood burning needs to shrink and disappear too. 6 air pollution from wood burning. Trump energy secretary to return billions set aside for green projects. Trump administration. The Guardian air pollution from wood burning. The oceans of the world fail key health check as acidity crosses critical threshold for marine life. The Guardian consumers reading unpublished Raymond Chandler short story to appear in literary magazine Raymond Chandler. The Guardian 7 Hawaii air pollution from wood burning. Maui officials knocked on doors to warn residents before wildfire threat. Receded Hawaii fires. The Guardian medicine and science. Huntington's disease treated successfully for first time in UK gene therapy trial. Huntington's disease. The Guardian medicine and science. Pregnant women deserve so much better than the Trump theater of scaremongering and shame. Kate Wimmersley. The Guardian medicine and science supercentenarian gives scientists insight on secrets of healthy old age aging. The Guardian medicine and science. The Trump absurd Tylenol claims heighten the suffering of pregnant women in the U.S. Maura Donegan. The Guardian medicine and science. The Trump Tylenol announcement incurs furious backlash. This is yet more utter rubbish. The Guardian medicine and science. VA doctors warn cuts and privatization threaten the healthcare of veterans. Trump administration. The Guardian medicine and science who rejects the Trump claims of link Between Tylenol and Autism, World Health Organization, The Guardian, Medicine and Science, why do the children of elderly patients stay away? Loneliness makes them get sicker and stay sicker for longer. Ranjana Srivastava, The Guardian, Oklahoma official says all high schools will have turning point chapters after Charlie Kirk killing Oklahoma. The Guardian, Oklahoma turning point chapters at Oklahoma high schools will counter woke indoctrination. Official says Oklahoma. The Guardian 8 RFK Junior Vaccine denial. Trump faces Republican backlash over autism and vaccine claims of RFK Jr. The Guardian TV star, Democrat. The idea we should be in the kitchen serving our men is enraging singer-songwriter Sarah McLachlan on her long fight for voices of women music. The Guardian TV star, Democrat. Jimmy Kimmel comeback breaks his YouTube monologue views record. Jimmy Kimmel. The Guardian TV star, Democrat. Jimmy Kimmel says silencing comedians is against American as the show returns to air after suspension. Jimmy Kimmel, The Guardian TV star, Democrat. Right-wing podcasters run rampant with Charlie Kirk conspiracies. It is craven opportunism. Charlie Kirk shooting. The Guardian TV star, Democrat. Stephen Colbert on Jimmy Kimmel, to know him well is to admire him immensely. Late-night TV roundup. The Guardian TV star, Democrat. The American system is badly broken. Bernie Sanders. The Guardian TV star, Democrat. The Democratic super lawyer Trump cannot silence. We are in the break glass moment of American history. Trump. The Guardian TV star, Democrat. The rise and fall of Disney. How the company found then lost its backbone. Walt Disney Company. The Guardian TV star, Democrat. The students who debated with Charlie Kirk, his goal was to verbally defeat us. Charlie Kirk shooting. The Guardian TV star, Democrat. With the Kimmel suspension, the FCC chair made himself the Trump chief of comedy. Sidney Blumenthal. The Guardian. Trump and Epstein fallout. New statue on National Mall celebrates long-lasting bond between Trump and Epstein. Trump. The Guardian. 9 Women America and Germany, from Nazi Germany to the America of Trump. Why strongmen rely on women at home. Women. The Guardian. Women reading. The Librarians review the heroic women battling against book bans and censorship. Movies. The Guardian. Canada. Medicine and Science. Trudeau made headlines with free birth control. Why did not Canada follow through? Canada. The Guardian. United Kingdom must far-right friend women allegedly abused by Andrew Tate. Decry misleading Spectator article. Andrew Tate. The Guardian. 10 A United Kingdom Trump far-right friend resisting UK right-wing Nigel Farage-ism offers the Lib Dems a rare clarity of purpose. Raphael Baer. The Guardian. 10 B Europe. The far-right Trump. If Europe keeps placating its own far-right, how can it possibly stand up to Trump? Thursday. Nguyen and Jan-Nick Jansen. The Guardian. Ukraine most destructive arms race in human history. Zelensky appeals at UN for intervention to stop Russia. The Guardian. Ukraine. The Guardian view on the Trump support for Ukraine. A welcome but not reliable vote of confidence. Editorial. The Guardian. Hungary. Trump strongman friend Viktor Orban faces toughest challenge in years, but can the strongman of Hungary be unseated? World News. The Guardian. 11 Turkey political prisoner Mayor of Istanbul. I was elected Mayor of Istanbul, but I write this from jail. Turkish democracy is under grave threat. Ekrem Imamoğlu. The Guardian. United Nations. Trump delivered an embarrassing performance at the UN General Assembly. Mohammed Bazi. The Guardian. United Nations. Ben Jennings on the Trump UN speech. A cartoon. Ben Jennings. The Guardian. United Nations. Syria from Al-Qaeda to the Upper East Side. The new leader of Syria makes his debut on the world stage. United Nations. The Guardian. United Nations. The Trump UN rant revealed his true priorities, and Britain should watch out. Martin Kettle. The Guardian. Cat's corner strategy with Tiger and Leone. Saying the quiet part out loud. Roar. Hi, I am Tiger. Our human asked us to get up from our naps and start Cat's corner strategy with Tiger and Leone. She gave us a list of internet allies which we will post for her here.
Hi, I am Leone. It is better for your mental fitness to go to these websites than to go to bro sites for advice. Substack letters from an American Heather Cox Richardson. Substack your local epidemiologist. The Midas Touch. The Guardian. The New York Times.
One introduction. RAWSEP view. The United States government was on track in the Biden administration to reduce the prices for both clean energy heat pumps and clean energy electric cars. Trump tariffs are expected to upset those plans to prevent future air pollution and prevent climate change. The United States government should, instead of certifying wood stoves as safe when they are not safe, go forward with regulations that ban wood stove use and direct government money for use of forest refuse only for home building and furniture building. For just a few examples of use of forest products for non-burning uses, it is well known from scientific and medical research that wood burning is a substantial source of PM2.5 emissions, yet the wood burning industry uses the scientifically debunked theory named carbon neutrality of wood burning to argue that wood burning replacing coal burning in industry, and in a trickle-down argument that wood burning should continue for home heating should continue. Presumably because it is called renewable, wood may be renewable in the sense that a tree can be planted in the place of a cut-down burned tree. But it takes centuries or decades for the newly planted tree to attain the stature of the cut-down burned tree. During those centuries or decades, photosynthesis, which converts CO2 to oxygen, and so sequesters some carbon, will not take place at the same rate as photosynthesis was performed previously, and wood burning emits both CO2 and PM2.5, and PM2.5 is not absorbed by trees, so PM2.5 is not diminished by planting a tree in the place of a cut-down and burned tree. In fact, a living tree closes its pores against the presence of PM2.5 from nearby wood burning, just as humans hold their breath in the presence of PM2.5 from nearby wood burning. And when a tree closes its pores, the level of photosynthesis that absorbs CO2 pollution goes down. Wood burning emits 90% PM2.5 particulate matter of 2.5 micrometer size, the perfect size to infiltrate the human lung, setting off a cascade of human health problems and early deaths. Contrary to many beliefs, wood burning emits 2.8 times the PM2.5 as the fossil fuel coal burning, and wood burning emits 450 times the PM2.5 as the fossil fuel natural gas burning. Replacing coal burning with wood burning creates more air pollution in the form of CO2 and PM2.5 than coal burning. This emission data comes from testing the cleanest burning wood stove in the United Kingdom, The Eco-Design Wood Stoven International Convention does not count the emissions from wood burning. The emissions from wood burning are erased from all countries around the world when calculating if each country has met its climate goals. This non-counting or erasure of wood burning emissions data from climate goals does not mean wood burning emissions do not exist. RAWSEP View Purple Air PM2.5 monitors hanging from the eaves of the house of a near neighbor should be used to measure the level of PM2.5 in the air hyperlocally in the yards of near neighbors of indoor residential wood burners. If PM2.5 levels exceed World Health Organization standards of 5 micrograms per cubic meter annually, then that evidence of air pollution from wood burning should lead to the shutdown of that indoor residential wood burning appliance, one appliance at a time if necessary.